So you want to start off by introducing yourself? Tell me a little about yourself, whatever you want to share.
So, hi, my name is Devin. For the context of the interview, because it is gonna kind of be important, I am an avid weed smoker. I use it because I have issues sleeping and because I have chronic pain. I've tried sleepy time tea. I have tried everything else that has been like naturally provided. Um, and it doesn't quite work for me. Not even melatonin works very well for me. Um, so smoke weed for that. And then I have a chronic pain condition. So I also smoke weed to treat that. I am in two different bands. One of them's a little inactive, one of them's more active. Um, Music is like the number one thing that I do. I teach first and second graders. Um, yeah.
Sweet. Okay, so I'll just give you this time to share with me your story, your experience with like fentanyl, whatever you're comfortable with sharing. Just go ahead and tell me.
So I'm actually telling you about two different experiences. I have two different experiences. One of them was being laced with fentanyl, and one of them was being laced with codeine. Um, so like I'm sure that we both know, like fentanyl and codeine are both narcotics that treat pain. Codeine treats cough and pain, but regardless, um, and they're both very highly addictive. um, and in the case that I was laced, I'm gonna start with my story with fentanyl and then my story with codeine.
Okay.
Um, so the time that I was laced with fentanyl and codeine, it was both through weed. It was because I had gotten weed that was a little shady. Um, Fentanyl was with a cartridge, like a wax pen cartridge, and codeine was just like regular bud. So with the fentanyl one, I was with a friend who like I'm no longer friends with just because like he was pretty shady. Um, and that experience was definitely a nail in the coffin. However, um, like we were in his car and he picked me up from school just because like he been graduated for a couple of years. We known each other for like 3-ish years. I was having a pretty rough day that day. He had offered me like, hey, like I did bring my cart. Like, do you like just want to go to the park and smoke? Um, so like we go hang out at like one of the bigger parks in Lancaster, and like we're chilling and we're smoking on his cart. And like when it comes to smoking a wax pen versus actual like bud, a wax pen is much stronger. That's very important for the context of the story. So, with that knowledge and with that prefacing, we're smoking this cart, and like he had done hard drugs in his past. So, like recent past at the time.
Right.
Um, so he kind of like had a like more of a tolerance to that kind of stuff where I've never done hard drugs in my life. I refuse to. Just because I know how awful the addictive just codependency can be. Um, Especially having ADHD. Like part of having ADHD is your brain chasing dopamine, and then when it finds dopamine, it craves it constantly. So just like avoiding stuff like that is very important.
Mhm.
Um, and like we're going through it, and I haven't done a lot. I've done like 2, 3 puffs, and that usually is like fine for me. And like 30 minutes goes by, and I'm starting to feel a little rattlesnakey. Like I'm starting to feel a little weird. Um, So I'm like, you know what? Maybe this card is just really strong. I'm gonna have like two more hits. So I take two more. Another like 30-ish, 40-ish minutes passes, and that's when I really start to feel some effects that don't normally come with weed. That's when I like kind of feel like my heart racing a lot. That's when I kind of feel like a little limp.
Mhm.
Like I started feeling like I couldn't move. Like I thought that I was overreacting. Um, because I used to be really bad at listening to my body. So I thought that I was overreacting at the time.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm like, I'm gonna keep going. I have like two more, and the next thing I know, like I'm going in and out of consciousness, which is not normal for at least for me. to do that many hits off of a wax pen and then feel that way. Like I get a little sleepy and then I take a nap, but that's about it. But I had never done anything that had made me go in and out of consciousness like that.
Like you were black.
And yeah, like I was blacking out, and then when I would like come back to consciousness, like the world was blue. It felt like that the world was like blue and orange. Um, so like just time goes by. I'm like, yo, homie, like I'm not feeling good. I think I should go to a hospital. And he's like, I mean, I feel fine though. This is why the context he had a little bit of a history with hard drugs is important. This is why the tolerance mention was important
Mhm.
because I don't have that tolerance. I didn't have that tolerance. So getting hit with like the fentanyl was getting hit with a bus. And he's like, no, like let's just try like getting up and walking. Let's try getting up and walking. And I'm like, okay. And I try to open the door and I cannot move. I barely could lift my arm. And like he had to get out the car and like open the door. And I was trying my best to walk. The furthest I could get was like to the closest couple of trees. And I just laid there. My heart's racing. I'm having a really hard time breathing. I'm back to going in and out of consciousness. Like my body feels like it is trying to stay alive and very much struggling. Um, and sure enough, I like ask him, I'm like, where, like after like some time passes and like I had some water and like everything kind of like calmed down. And I had actually like we called somebody and we were like he was like, yo, Devin is kind of like tripping, what's up? Because we had a friend who's an EMT, um, which is fortunate.
Yeah.
uh we're like my friend calls him, he's like, yo, you gotta come check out Devin. Like he's having a really bad reaction to this weed. And our friend is like, bad reaction to the weed, but he smokes like a lot. Why would he have a bad reaction to the weed? Um, so he comes over. So like he brings what he has and just like he started, I don't even remember what he did. He sure did something and it sure did help. Um, but like I kind of like come back to I kind of like am able to move. I'm like still groggy, but I'm functioning better. And our friend is like, "Hey, where did you get this cart?" And my friend Michael is like, "I got it from my plug. Um, like I've never had a bad experience with it, so I figured like I could share it with Devin." Um, and we're like looking up what could have maybe had that reaction. Like maybe it's like a cannabinoid or something that was in it. Maybe it's like maybe a type of weed that was too strong for me at the time. But nothing like matched up with how I was feeling until we looked up what are the effects of being less of fentanyl. Um, because again, we had the context that this one friend had done hard drugs before. So like we were looking up what does it feel like to be laced with like coke. Didn't feel like that. What did it feel like to be laced with LSD? Didn't feel like that. We look up what it's like to be laced with fentanyl, and that's everything that I was experiencing, like
That's
to a
the.
T.
Mhm.
Um, so that was the fentanyl experience. Let me tell you about the codeine experience.
Okay.
Um, so when I was laced with codeine, that was much scarier than being laced with like fentanyl. And I think the main reason for that was because the amount of codeine I got laced with was probably more fatal, like could have been way more fatal than when I was laced with fentanyl.
Mm.
Um, so I mostly go to punk shows, and punk shows uh are a pretty safe space for like sharing drugs because nobody wants to get laced, nobody wants none of that smoke. So when it comes to punk shows, like if there's someone you should avoid, you will know. And if they come to a show, they'll get pushed. They'll get shown out by everybody there.
Mm.
Um, so when it comes to punk shows, like that's a very safe environment to kind of like party. This was a time where I decided to check out a different scene. And I'd expected it to be like a punk show. It was the aviator underground hip hop scene. There was some like shady seeming people, but I mean I didn't want to assume nothing because that just didn't feel right.
Mm.
Um, so like we go to the show, me and a couple of my friends, we're like, you know what, this is a new scene. Let's check it out. because I had a friend who invited me. He was like, "Hey, like we met at this punk show. Like I know that you like shows like that. I know that I listen to all kind of music kind of person. Like come to the show." Um, we went to go support a homie of ours. Um, what we didn't know, and not even what our friend knew, he just knew that he got a show and that he was excited to perform. He didn't
Mhm.
know that like it was going to be an environment with like people doing heavy drugs and stuff like that. Like they're like there's drinks, there's people who are like doing Nas, there's like the usual stuff that you would see at a punk show.
Mhm.
Only difference is like the atmosphere is definitely more like kind of like hip hoppy. Like there's rap going on in the background. There's people like preparing their sets. There's people looking over their lyrics. Like they're getting ready to do their thing. Um, and me and my friends, or at least like one of my friends, um, because like we like it's a like a pretty like normal thing to drink at a show. But we always bring our own stuff just because like harm reduction. We don't know what other people are putting in their stuff, even if it's like an unopened can of beer. We tend to be pretty careful, and we were especially careful because this was a new environment.
Mhm.
Um, the one thing we weren't careful about was weed. And there's this guy that was like selling these like first of all, very neatly rolled blunts, very nice looking blunts. And I was like, okay, okay. He was charging like $10 for it. I'm like, well, I mean, we got this case of beer. Can we trade you like a couple, like two cans and maybe just like two cans for a blunt? And he goes, yeah, yeah, that's cool. Um, so like we trade some beer, we get the blunt, um, and we're smoking off it. And like it's pretty good weed. Like we're not really feeling anything that felt like it was laced. Um, for a little while, for like roughly a couple hours, but like after a little while, like that weed was hitting. Um, but it just felt like it was good weed. Um, to be frank, it just felt like it was good weed. It was like, okay, like my heart isn't racing, like I don't feel like I can't move, like I feel pretty good right now. So like we're hitting off the blunt that we traded for. And a couple hours pass. And like I want to give the context of because I had given money to like purchase the booze,
Mhm.
I had pitched in the most money. It's kind of like a rule of thumb. Whoever pitches in the most money to buy the booze for that show, if they trade it for things, is like gets kind of gets the majority of the thing.
Okay.
Um, so like I had smoked a majority of this blunt. Um, and by the 3 hour mark of being at that show, I couldn't even remember what happened. And it wasn't because I had drank that much. I had one beer that was like 2 point something percent. It was like a Coors Light or something. Like it's there's not a lot of alcohol in a Coors Light. So it couldn't have been the Coors Light that I had drank because I had one of them and they were one of ours. We had purchased them. They were unopened. It was fine and dandy. I wish that I could tell you what happened in that 3 hour period because I only started coming back to after the fact of like I was in a bathroom throwing up. I black out again, and all of a sudden I'm back in this person's backyard. Like the person who was hosting the show, to be clear. I'm like in this person's backyard. I'm leaning on the wall, I'm sitting down. My friends are like trying to keep me awake. And the last thing I kind of like blacked out after that. I remember getting into their car. I remember giving someone a ride home. And I remember getting Taco Bell. And I remember coming home. This is back when I lived with my mom. I remember coming home and she knows how groggy I sounded. She was like, "Oh my God." Like she didn't come check on me because she was like, whatever. But like the next morning, she was like, "Yo, you sounded awful when you came home. What happened?" And I'm like, "I think I got laced." So kind of like figuring out what it was. And my friend who had similar effects, just not as strong because he hadn't done as much, um, was saying like, "Hey, um, you and I smoked the most out of that. Did it feel like your like teeth or gums were like really numb? Because he had been laced with codeine before, so he knows exactly what it feels like." I'm like, "Yeah, but I just like assumed that maybe we got laced with fentanyl because that's pretty much what it felt like, just a little bit stronger. Like maybe there was a stronger concentration. Um, and he was like, "No, we got laced with codeine because if you smoke fentanyl, like your mouth doesn't get numb like that. Like your mouth and tongue don't get numb like that. We got laced with codeine, and that really sucked because I had a drug test for a theoretical job, so I had to completely flush my system as much as I could in the next week, hoping that everything would be out of my system. And like weed was okay to be in your system. It was just like anything harder than like weed, they would like flag you down for and be like, sorry, you can't take this job. I wish I could have remembered that night more. Like I guess a couple of people who were like helping me like throw up anything that I like might have ingested if it was that
Mhm.
um were God, I wish I could remember them better. Um because they did save my life, but I don't remember it because of how much I got laced with.
So maybe what are some ways do you think that people can kind of avoid that, avoid getting laced, kind of being safer, kind of harm reduction, trying to be safe, getting weed from other people, things like that, if they're going to do it anyways? What do you think are some good ways to be safe?
Well, for starters, if you're gonna get weed from somebody who A grows their own weed or B is just like a general plug, all like if it comes in like a package from a dispensary, you still might want to double check on that weed. Because even though it's like from a dispensary, you should like still see if it's like shiny. Cause like we can like look a little like crystally, but it's not like if your weed looks glassy, you don't smoke it, pretty much. Like I've noticed that like I've been offered something that like looked a little weird, like looked a little glassy, and I was like, nah. And then we didn't smoke it, we set it on a fire, and then it smelled like it was plastic burning.
Mhm.
So there was something on that weed. Don't know what it was because we didn't smoke it. We didn't want to smoke it. But like identifying what certain drugs look like when they're on weed, and also if you are skeptical about a place you got your weed from, making sure to kind of like light it up before you pack a bowl and kind of like smell it. If it smells like normal weed, cool. If it doesn't, I know that your money is going to get wasted, but you got to throw that away. Another thing is that if you can get weed from a dispensary, that like you need to make sure um the you want to make sure that it's a reputable dispensary, kind of like doing research on the places you're getting your weed from. Another thing is if you are really, really worried about getting laced, um, either grow your own weed or find someone that grows their own weed that you know for a fact you can trust. Like you have smoked their weed before, their weed is fine. It doesn't seem like they lace their stuff, kind of stuff like that. I think the main thing I want to add is when it comes to plugs, make sure it's a reputable plug. Okay, quick weed science, really quick. So, when you're smoking weed, in weed there's something called cannabinoids, and cannabinoids like push little buttons in your brain that kind of like give you that high feeling. And when people are taking what's called a tolerance break, where they're not smoking weed for a couple months, maybe like a year or something, to kind of get the feeling of being high back, it's usually not because they need a tolerance break. It's because they keep doing the same cannabinoids that are in weed. A lot of times people find a weed that they really like and they stick to it, which is valid. And I think tolerance breaks are also incredibly valid, like treating your lungs and stuff like that. But um, a lot of like it's all about like the cannabinoids that are actually in the weed.
Mhm.
Um, and sometimes certain cannabinoids like push the right buttons in your brain and give you all the right effects that you may need or want in your bud. Um, the main reason people lace their weed is because they want people to think, "Wow, this weed is so potent. This weed is so strong. This is the best we've ever had in my life." But that's because it was laced. Like smoking good weed doesn't feel like that. But when it comes to being laced, not the same feeling whatsoever. There's an absolute difference, and if people really want to practice harm reduction, they need to really figure out what that difference is before they do anything.
Thank you so much for the advice and
Yeah.
sharing your stories. I
Yeah,
really,
of course.
yeah, that's all I have. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.